Good evening, the Freilichen Hanukkah, Hanukkah Sameach. The first night of the Festival of Lights is tonight, and may you be enjoying an uplifting, inspiring, illuminating Hanukkah. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on the first night of Hanukkah? Stephen in New Hampshire. Joe in the Inland Empire, Lucy in Minnesota, Yehuda in South Carolina, Bella in Florida, Melissa in Great Neck, Shandora in the Bronx, Yosef in Englewood. I wasn't here last night because Chabad has the custom of not to learn on Nittelnacht, which we talked about. Belle here in Texas, managing to stay awake this evening. Happy Christmas and happy Hanukkah to my dear classmates and to Sal and Nina. I'm Yisrael Chai. Yehudit in the house, Guy in Ohio, Lorraine in Texas, Yosef wishing everyone a Freilich and Hanukkah, Aoife in Florida, Ella, Chaim in Florida, Spencer in Connecticut, Marjorie in Georgia wishing everyone a Lichtiger Hanukkah, Alan in New York City. Welcome everybody. Is this thing? Hopefully it's coming through on the YouTube side. Mine was a little bit stuck, but I think it's okay. I don't know what's going on there. Yeah, okay. All right. Another fascinating daf. Lots of interesting teachings tonight on Daf Zion, page 7, here in Tractate Sanhedrin, the 24th volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 1, generally talking about the composition of a court for various kinds of cases. As we've seen in most cases, there should be 3 judges. Last night we were talking about that you could do with less judges if you're not reaching a din, a judgment, but rather a peshara or a bitsua, a compromise or a mediation, which one opinion was you shouldn't do because you're setting aside the possibility of arriving at the absolute truth. But most opinions saying wonderful because you're promoting the ways of peace. And if you can reach a compromise that everyone is happy with and you don't have to go through the whole process of litigation, wonderful. We picked this up on page 7a, fairly near the top. And various sages who offered interpretations of the verse, Psalm 10, verse 3, and the covetous blesses himself, though he despises the Lord. One opinion who said you shouldn't have a mediation or compromise in place of a din, in place of a judgment, was citing this verse, like one who covets, will try to get get a settlement so that he can get something that he might not have gotten in a din, in a proper judgment, a complete judgment from a court of 3 judges, etc. He thinks maybe he can do better, and so his motivation isn't just to pursue peace. That was one interpretation of this verse, but we also saw that this verse is used for other things, like somebody who eats prohibited food, or somebody who consumes something that is stolen and says a bracha, says a blessing over it. He's not actually, blessing himself by doing that. He's actually cursing himself, because when you say a blessing over something that's prohibited to you, it's not looked on favorably in heaven. So the various sages who offered interpretations of this verse, and the covetous blesses himself though he despises the Lord, all those interpretations we heard yesterday, all of them disagree with the explanation of Rabbi Tanchum bar Hanilai. He uses that verse for something else. As Rabbi Tanchum bar Hanilai says, this verse was stated only with regard to the incident of the golden calf. As it is stated, Exodus 32 verse 5, and Aaron saw this, and he built, vayiven, an altar, a mizbeach, before it, and said, tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. What did Aaron see? Now, this is one of those perplexing verses in the Torah, because Aaron is somebody, that we shower praise on him. Moses' brother, the first high priest, the Kohen Gadol, and we say that it is, that all of the ways of Torah are peace, and the greatest lover of peace, the greatest pursuer of peace was Aaron. He is our very role model for somebody who pursues peace, and peace is in many ways the highest value. So how could somebody that we esteem so highly, be right at the center of one of the greatest sins in at least in Jewish history? I was going to say in human history, and in a sense it is, but certainly in Jewish history, right? That while Moses was up on Mount Sinai receiving the Torah, all the people down below panicked that Moses wasn't coming back. And it's not that they didn't believe in God, the God who brought them out of Egypt, but they felt that without Moses, they were bereft, and that they needed some kind of intermediary between them and God. And what were they used to? Idols. So they said, let's build this golden calf to serve as an intermediary between us and God. They weren't really worshiping the calf. They didn't go that low. But still, we don't do that, right? We don't use statues as intermediaries between us and God. It stinks of avodah zarah, of idolatry. And as we know, God was furious with it. Moses, when he finally did come back, he unleashed the Levites on all the people who were dancing around that golden calf. Many people were killed that day. And the residue of that sin is something that we still deal with today. And who built that calf? Aaron, right? Or at least he collected all the rings and gold jewelry and threw it in the fire, and out came this calf. How could he have done that? How could he have done that? How could the high priest have done that? Here's an explanation we're going to hear now. Aaron saw this, and he built an altar before it, and said, tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. So what did Aaron see? And Rabbi Binyamin Bar Yefet says that Rabbi Lazar says what he saw, what Aaron saw was Hur. He saw Hur, who had been appointed together with Aaron by Moses to lead the people during Moses' absence. See Exodus 24:14. And so what did Aaron see? He saw Hur slaughtered. The people who were so intent on building this calf to have an intermediary between themselves and God, when Hur stood up to them, Hur spelled H-U-R in English, he stood up to them and they killed him. That's what Aaron saw. Oh, now Aaron's behavior becomes a little bit clearer, right? He saw the guy who did try to stop them murdered. So then what? He saw that Hur was slaughtered before him, as he had protested the plan to fashion a calf, and he had been murdered by the people as a result. So the verse is therefore interpreted not as Aaron built an altar before the calf, but rather he understood vayaven, not vayiven, but vayaven, right? Not he built, but rather he understood. He understood from the slaughter, mizavuach, before his own eyes, and he then called for a feast, right? So was he doing this just to save his own life, right? Because actually, you're not supposed to save your own life if it means that you have to perform idolatry in order to save it. But it wasn't to save his own life. Keep listening. Aaron said to himself, if I do not listen to these people now, they will do to me as they did to Hur. And the verse, shall the priest and the prophet be slain in the sanctuary of the Lord? And that will be fulfilled through me. And they will never have a remedy for such a sin, right? Because Aaron, God spoke to Aaron. So Aaron was both a priest and a prophet. So if they not only murdered Hur, who was a political leader, a temporary political leader, but they murdered Aaron, who was a priest and a prophet, that would be too much, right? The people could never overcome such a sin. That verse will be fulfilled through me, says Aaron, and they will never have a remedy for such a sin. It is better for them to worship the calf, as it is possible they will have a remedy for that through repentance. Nevertheless, according to Rabbi Tanchum Bar Chanilai, whoever praises Aaron for this compromise is provoking God. Maybe Aaron did the best that he could figure out at that moment. Maybe just couldn't stall anymore. Maybe he was out of options. But we don't praise Aaron for building the calf. Even with this explanation, we can understand it, but we don't praise him for it. And with regard to those Tanaim who did not interpret the verse, the beginning of strife is as when one releases water, from Proverbs 17:14, with regard to compromise. What do they derive from this verse? Well, they understand the verse. Now, so we were talking about that one verse, right? And the covetous blesses himself, though he despises the Lord. And another verse that we looked at yesterday a few times was the beginning of strife is as when one releases water. And this was used to say that's why we pursue a compromise rather than a full litigation. But not everyone sees that verse as having that meaning. So the people who don't see it that way, what do they derive from this verse? Says the Gemara, they understand the verse in accordance with the opinion of Rav Hamnuna. As Rav Hamnuna says, the beginning of a person's judgment after he dies is that he is judged only concerning matters of Torah. As it is stated, the beginning of strife is as when one releases water. So this idea is, first of all, water is often compared to Torah, and Torah is often compared to water. So what does this mean? That when a person dies, the first thing that you're going to get judged for everything you've ever done. But the first thing they'll judge you for is, did you study Torah, right? Did you set regular times for Torah study? Other people say the first thing will be asked is, were you honest in business? But others say the first thing is, did you regularly study Torah? And why is that the first thing? Because if you regularly study Torah, it's going to keep you from doing lots of other sins. Because you have an ongoing relationship with God, with the law, with Torah, with scripture, with eternal values, and you'll just come to sin much less if you study Torah regularly. So that's why that's the first thing they ask you. That's the first thing you'll be judged about. Based on this verse, Rav Huna says, this quarrel between people is comparable to a split in the hose. Again, the beginning of strife is as when one releases water. So Rav Huna is saying something totally different. He says that when people quarrel, this is comparable to a split in a hose caused by a burst of water emptying into a field. Once the split in the hose widens, it widens even more and it can no longer be repaired. To save the field, the hose must be repaired as soon as it splits. And the same is true with regard to a quarrel. It must be stopped as soon as it begins, lest it become deeper, more angry, more feud-like, people get more entrenched in their position, etc. The best time to end a fight, to end a quarrel, is right after it begins. Abaye, the elder, makes a similar point with a different metaphor. And he says a quarrel is comparable to a board in a wooden bridge. Once it has stood in its place and been stabilized, it continues to stand and becomes ever more rigid and stable. Consequently, the best time to address and to end the dispute is at the very beginning, before it just becomes entrenched right between two people. New subject. Apropos the previous discussion, the Gemara recounts several incidents in which passers-by recited popular proverbs. The mnemonic for this is Shimi, Ushti, Sheva, Zemiros, Hu. To help you, if you're memorizing the Gemara, it will help you memorize. But the point is here, a person is going to be walking down the street reciting what was a popular saying at the time. Two sages overhear it, and they say, yeah, we don't need to look to a popular saying to understand that wisdom. We have it in the Bible. So how's this? There was a certain man who was saying as he walked, it is good for a person who hears statements said against him and yet remains silent, right? It's good to not argue with people when they're insulting you. Just take it. Don't get into a fight with them. Why is it good? Because 100 misfortunes pass him by as a result. One who's insulted and remains silent, he's actually going to be spared from 100 misfortunes. That's an old saying. Upon hearing this, Shmuel said to Rabbi Yehuda, a verse is written that conveys this message. Proverbs 17:14, the beginning of strife is as when one releases water. The words beginning, poter, of strife, reshis madon, allude to the beginning of 100 litigations, resh me'adine. So troubles are avoided if one overlooks and excuses poter an offense, right? When you let things go, you tend to avoid bigger troubles later. In terms of let things go when people are, insulting you. Just let it go. What do you need to get involved with them for? There was a certain man who was saying as he walked, for only 2 or 3 thefts, the thief is not executed by the heavenly court. Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, a verse is written that conveys this message. Amos 2:6. So says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel, or for 4, I will not repay it. And Shmuel interprets the verse rhetorically, as if saying, will I not repay the 4th offense? Accordingly, before the 4th offense, it is still possible to rectify the sins. The first 3, you might skate. Once you commit the same sin 4 times, you're in trouble. There was a certain man who was saying as he walked, 7 pits are dug for the man of peace, and he escapes all of them. And 1 pit is dug for the evildoer, and he cannot escape it. And Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, a verse is written that conveys the same message. See Proverbs 24, verse 16, and Proverbs 28, verse 18. For a righteous man falls 7 times and rises up again, but the wicked shall fall at once. There was a certain man who was saying as he walked, with regard to one who goes from the court, and his cloak has been taken from him in the course of proceedings, i.e., he lost all his money due to the ruling against him, right? He lost his shirt. Let him sing a song and go happily on the way. Although he lost the case, he has benefited from justice being served. Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, a verse is written with regard to Yisro's advice for judiciary reforms that conveys the message of this saying. Exodus 18:23. And all these people shall also go to their place in peace. Meaning, if justice is served, all the litigants, not only those who emerge victorious, can leave in peace, right? Even if you lose the case, but it was judged properly, you can walk away satisfied. Justice was done. Okay, I lost money. You know what? Problems that can be solved with money are not real problems when you compare to health problems, for example. There was a certain man who was saying as he walked, if a woman is carrying a basket on her head, when she is dozing, the reed basket falls. Okay, when people are not paying attention, trouble happens, right? Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, a verse is written that conveys the same message. Ecclesiastes 10:18. By laziness, the rafters sink in, and through idleness of the hands, the house leaks. There was a certain man who was saying as he walked, the man upon whom I relied has lifted his fist, ligzize, and stood against me. Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, a verse is written that conveys the same message. Psalm 41 verse 10. Indeed, my own familiar friend in whom I trusted, who did eat of my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. Shakespeare said it maybe a little bit more concise. Et tu, Brute? There was a certain man who was saying about his marriage as he walked. When our love was strong, we could have slept on a bed that was the width of a sword. And now that our love is not strong, a bed of 60 cubits is not sufficient for us. That would be a very big bed. That's a bed 90 feet wide. Rav Huna said verses are written that convey the same sentiments. Initially, it was written about God and Israel. God said, I will meet with you there, and I will speak with you from above the cover of the ark that contains the tablets of the Ten Commandments. That's Exodus 25:22. And it is taught in a Baraisa, the Ark of the Covenant was itself 9 handbreadths high, and the ark cover was 1 handbreadth thick. So there's a total height of 10 handbreadths here. So at first, when God had great affection for Israel, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, was revealed within the confines of this very limited space. And it is written later in Jewish history, 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 2, and the house that King Solomon built for the Lord, its length was 60 cubits, and its breadth 20 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. Obviously much larger than the Ark of the Covenant. And at the end, when Israel sinned, the whole of the space, the entire space of the temple was not expansive enough for the divine presence to rest within it. As it is written, Isaiah chapter 66, verse 1, thus says the Lord, the heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. Where is the house that you may build for me? And where is the place that may be my resting place? God knows that, Solomon's temple is still there. It was built for that exact purpose. So why is God asking this rhetorical question? Because he's saying the spiritual level of the people has fallen so far that God doesn't want to be among them anymore. And he's withdrawing his presence from the holy temple, and the destruction of the first temple would follow not long after. Tragically. The Gemara now returns to analyzing the Tosefta, from where may it be inferred that this expression, you shall not be afraid, taguru, Deuteronomy 1:17, that this is a term for gathering in, so that the term may be interpreted to mean that a judge may not keep his ruling to himself, right? He might be afraid that if he rules and he rules against, somebody who has power, who's a gangster, that the judge is going to suffer. So he might want to just say, I don't want to judge. Well, he can't get out of it. Rav Nachman said, the verse states, you shall plant vineyards and dress them, but you shall neither drink of the wine nor gather to Egor. This is one of the curses, right? When the level of the people falls, nothing that they will do will be successful. Deuteronomy 28:39. So Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says it is derived from here. She provides her bread in the summer and gathers, Agra, her food in the harvest. Proverbs 6:8. And Rav Acha, the son of Rav Ika, says it is derived from here. A wise man gathers, Oger, in the summer. The point being that these are expressions like the word gather, and the idea that a judge, I guess his judgment is gathered and he cannot keep it to himself. It has to be distributed to the people. New subject. The Gemara provides a mnemonic device for remembering the following series of statements about judges and their functions. Emes, Mammon, Yireh. That's going to help if you're memorizing the Gemara. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says that Rabbi Yonason says any judge who judges a judgment according to absolute truth, emes, causes the Shekhinah, the divine presence, to rest among Israel. As it is stated, God stands in the congregation of God in the midst of the judges. He judges. Psalm 82, indicating that the divine presence is in the midst of the court, right? So a court that is judging truthfully, honestly, according to God's law, actually causes God's presence to be felt, right? God's presence, is manifest in a court that is judging righteously and truthfully. And every judge who does not judge a judgment according to absolute truth causes the divine presence to withdraw from Israel. As it is stated, for the oppression of the poor, for the sighing of the needy, now will I arise, says the Lord. Psalm 12, verse 6. God will arise and leave the people as a result of oppression. Right? So think what's at stake. When a judge is judging, he's got to do his best to arrive at the proper verdict. And if he does, it's like God's presence comes closer to the people. If he is corrupt in any way, or, if he makes a mistake, it's an honest mistake, he should have done better, but it's not obviously nearly as bad as if he's corrupt, which really causes the divine presence to flee from Israel. And Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says that Rabbi Yonasan says, with regard to any judge who takes disputed property or money, mammon, from this litigant and gives it to that other litigant unlawfully, whether through error or through corruption, the Holy One, blessed be He, takes his soul from him as punishment for his corruption. So I guess we're talking about corruption. As it is stated, rob not the weak, because he is weak, neither crush the poor in the gate, for the Lord will plead their cause, and despoil of life those who despoil them. Proverb 22, verses 22 and 23. God cautions that he will take the life of one who steals from the poor at the gate. And what does at the gate mean? It means the courtroom, as the city gate was the traditional site of a community's court. And Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says that Rabbi Yonasan says a judge should always view himself as if a sword is placed between his thighs, so that if he leans to the right or to the left, he will be injured. And as if Gehenna is opened up beneath him, as it is stated, behold, it is the bed of Solomon. 60 mighty men are around it. Of the mighty men of Israel, they all handle the sword and are expert in war. Every man has his sword upon his thigh, due to dread in the night. Song of Songs, chapter 3, verses 7 and 8. And the words, due to dread in the night, mean due to the dread of Gehenna. Right? Gehenna is like hell, the temporary hell, where a soul goes to get purified before it can go on to its portion in the next world. Although there are some people who are so evil, and we're talking, tens of people, a dozen, maybe a few dozen people in all of history who are that evil that they go to hell and will never leave hell. Truly, truly evil people. But the vast majority of people, even if they go to Gehenna, they will leave Gehenna. But you don't want to go there. And the amount of time that you spend there might be temporary, but while you're there, who knows what it feels like? A month in Gehenna could feel like a century. I don't know. Please God, I shouldn't go there. And if I go there, may my stay be brief. So this idea that a judge, somebody who is judging, needs to be afraid, like that he's perched over Gehenna, because what he's doing as a judge is of the highest consequence, the highest stakes. Rabbi Yoshia, and some say Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, interpreted a verse homiletically. What is the meaning of that which is written? Jeremiah 21:12. House of David, so says the Lord, execute justice in the morning and deliver the spoiled out of the hand of the oppressor. And is it so that a court may judge in the morning, but the rest of the day it may not judge? Why does the verse specifically relate to judging in the morning? So rather, the meaning is, if the matter is as clear to you as the morning, state the verdict as a judge, right? If you know what the verdict is, if it's as clear to you as the morning is clear, so state the verdict. But if it's not clear to you, if you're not sure what the verdict is, do not state it. Better to be silent, thought a fool. Rabbi Chia bar Abba says that Rabbi Yonasan says this principle may be derived from a different place. Proverbs 7:4. Say to wisdom, you are my sister. If the matter is as clear to you as the fact that your sister is forbidden to you, state it. And if it's not that clear to you, don't state it. We are on page 7b now, have been for a couple paragraphs. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, if 10 judges are sitting in judgment, a prisoner's collar, referring to responsibility for the consequences of an incorrect verdict, hangs around all of their necks. And the Gemara asks, well, isn't it obvious that all of the judges bear joint responsibility for the joint verdict of the court? And the Gemara answers, it is necessary only in order to include a student who is sitting in front of his teacher in the court. And he notices that his teacher made a mistake. Although he is not formally part of the court, he nevertheless bears responsibility if he remains silent. The Gemara relates concerning Rav Huna that when a case would come before him for judgment, he would gather and bring 10 rabbis from the study hall of Rav. And he would say, I do this so that only a small part of the responsibility, comparable to a splinter from a beam, will reach each of us. The greater the number of judges, the less responsibility each one assumes for the verdict. Why? Because there's lots of judges there who, they're very likely to get the law correct with so many learned people in one place. Similarly, with Rav Ashi, when a person would come before him with meat suspected to be from a treifa, an animal that has a wound that will cause it to die within 12 months, therefore that animal is considered not kosher. Even though it's a kosher animal, if it has this kind of a wound, it may not be slaughtered and eaten. So is this wound that the animal has one that causes it to be a treifa or not? That would be the question that he's being asked. So Rav Ashi, when a person would come before him with meat suspected to be a treifa, he would gather and bring together all the butchers of Mata Mechasya and consult with them before ruling on the status of the meat. He would say to them, I do this so that only a small part of the responsibility, comparable to a splinter from a beam, will reach each of us. When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, from the land of Israel to Bavel, he said, Rav Nachman bar Cohen interpreted a verse homiletically. What is the meaning of that which is written, Proverbs 29:4? The king, by justice, establishes the land, but he who extracts gifts, terumos, gifts, overthrows it. So this teaches that if the judge is like a king, in that he does not need anything and is not dependent on anyone, so he establishes the land. He can serve as a judge. But if he is like a priest who seeks out his terumos from various granaries, as he is dependent on others, he overthrows the land. Right? You need judges to be independent. If a judge is dependent for his livelihood on other people, that will lead to corruption. In the house of the Nasi, they appointed a judge who was not learned. How could this happen? I don't know, but it happened. The judge said to Yehuda bar Nachmani, who was the interpreter of Reish Lakish, and whose role was to repeat and explain the sage's lectures, stand over me as an interpreter, and I will lecture. So Yehuda bar Nachmani arose and bent over him in the conventional manner to hear the judge's words. And being ignorant, the judge did not say anything to him. This guy who was appointed as a judge, maybe because he had some political pull, but he was absolutely not qualified to be a judge, asked, one of the sages who is qualified, could you be an interpreter for me? And then the judge didn't say anything. What he was really wanting was that this competent sage who would be pretending to act as his interpreter would actually do the judging, right? So Yehuda bar Nachmani said about him, about this, incompetent idiot judge who should never have been appointed. So he said about him, the verse from Habakkuk 2:19, woe to him who says to the wood, awake, and to the dumb stone, arise. Can this teach? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all in the midst of it. In other words, this judge is a moron. He's like a piece of wood or stone. There's nothing there. And so is this judge appointed to teach the public for gold, i.e., for payment, but no more qualified than wood or stone. And in the future, the Holy One, blessed be He, will punish those who appoint such judges. As it is stated in the next verse, but the Lord is in His holy sanctuary. Let all the earth be silent before Him. Habakkuk 2:20. God, who is above everything, will judge those responsible for such appointments. Because clearly, if an idiot, incompetent man was appointed to a position of public responsibility as a judge, it must be that, somebody bribed someone, and whoever was bribed to allow this to happen will pay a steep price in the next world, or perhaps in this world. But the point is, God will see it and take action. Reish Lakish says, with regard to anyone who appoints over the community a judge who is not fit, it is as though he plants an asheira tree among the Jewish people. An asheira was a type of tree that was worshipped by people in that region. It was a tree used for idolatry, right? There's no bigger sin. The three big sins in the Torah are murder, rape, and idolatry. Okay, those are considered at the same level. So idolatry is just huge sin at that level. And so a tree that was worshipped by the people that lived in the Holy Land before the children of Israel came, this was the kind of practice that needed to be destroyed, right? Asherah trees needed to be uprooted and destroyed because people worshiped them as gods, right? It was a form of idolatry. So now he's saying that, like, somebody, who puts an incompetent judge to judge over the people, somebody who doesn't know Torah law to judge the people, allegedly according to Torah law, this is like planting an asherah tree among the children of Israel. Terrible sin at the level of idolatry. Rav Ashi says, and in a place where there are Torah scholars, it is as though he planted the tree next to the altar, right? The altar in the holy temple. As it is stated, you shall not plant yourself in asherah beside the altar of the Lord your God, right? Rav Ashi is saying you had Torah scholars that you could have appointed to be a judge. Instead, you corruptly appointed this idiot, right? So if there were no Torah scholars to choose from, okay, well, then you should have at least chosen a competent layman. And if you didn't, is like planting an asherah in the community of Israel. But if you did have Torah scholars to choose from and still you appointed this moron, then that is like planting an asherah tree in the holy temple right next to the holy altar. That's how bad it is. It is written, you shall not make with me gods of silver and gods of gold. Exodus 20:20. And the Gemara asks, it is gods of silver and gods of gold that you may not make? But are gods of wood permitted? Why does the verse specify silver and gold? You shall not make any, idols. You shall not make any gods of any material. Why is silver and gold mentioned? Rather, Rav Ashi says this verse discusses a judge. Judges are called Elohim, a word that is also used as a name of God, but is also used to refer to judges, who comes, i.e. is appointed due to payment of silver, and a judge who comes due to payment of gold, right? He got that position by bribing someone. The Gemara relates that when Rav, when he would come to court to judge a case, he would say this about himself: by his own will, he goes out to danger of death. As a judge who misjudges a case is liable to receive the punishment of death at the hand of heaven. And he does not do what is necessary to provide for the needs of his house. And he enters his home empty-handed because a judge does not receive a salary. So he said, if only it should be so, that his entry into his home will be the same as his departure, i.e. without sin or transgression, right? So he's saying, like, I'll do my duty. Rav, right? He's so learned, people need him to be a judge. But he's risking his life by being a judge, because if he gets it wrong, he could have to play, he could be sentenced to the death penalty by the heavenly tribunal. He doesn't get paid for that position. And he has this risk that, even if he is not subject to the death penalty, still, if he gets something wrong, he might be carrying that sin around with him for the rest of his life. In a similar demonstration, and he's being very humble. It's saying not like, hey, I'm Rav, I'm so learned that people all rely on me. He's like, yeah, I'm Rav. I have to do this job. And, what if I get it wrong? I mean, he's a very humble man. In a similar demonstration of humility, when Rav would see a convoy of scribes following after him to honor him, now you get a sense of the position of Rav in the community, he would say, quoting a line from Job, though his excellency mount up to the heavens and his head reach the clouds, yet he shall perish forever like his own dung. They who have seen him shall say, where is he? Right? He never got full of himself at all. It is said of Mar Zutra the pious that when the people would carry him to his lectures on their shoulders during Shabbos of the festival, he would say this to avoid becoming arrogant. Proverbs 27:24, power is not forever, and does the crown endure for all generations? When things are going really well and you're being honored, it's good to remember this too shall pass, and don't get full of yourself. Bar Kapara taught, based on a homiletical interpretation of the verse, from where is this matter that the sages stated derived? Be temperate in judgment. That's the beginning of Pirkei Avos. First they do the transmission of the Torah from Moses to Joshua to the elders, etc., all the way to the rabbis. And then the first teaching is, I think it's be temperate in judgment, gather many students, and build a fence around the Torah. So what is this be temperate in judgment? From where is this derived? As it is written, Exodus 20:23, neither shall you go up by steps onto my altar, i.e., do not ascend hurriedly. And juxtaposed to this, it is written, now these are the ordinances that you shall set before them. Right? Be temperate in judgment. Don't rush. Read the ordinances carefully, study all the law, be deliberate and deliberate with your colleagues to make sure you get the right judgment. Rabbi Eliezer says, from where is it derived that a judge may not step over the heads of the sacred nation? Meaning, walking among those assembled for the lecture who would sit upon the floor in such a manner that he has the appearance of stepping on them. Right? You have to be so careful not only to not be haughty, to not even appear haughty. It is derived from that which is stated, neither shall you go up by steps. And juxtaposed to it is an introduction to civil laws and courtroom regulations. Now, these are the ordinances. This indicates that the prohibition against ascending upon steps applies to judges. The Gemara interprets the second part of the verse cited above. Now, these are the ordinances that you shall set before them. The verse should have stated that you shall teach them. What is indicated by the phrase set before them? So Rabbi Yirmiyah, and some say Rabbi Chia bar Abba says, these are the judge's tools. What are the tools of the trade for a judge? To illustrate, the Gemara relates that Rav Huna, when he would go out to judgment, right, when he would go to sit in court and judge cases, he would say this, take out for me the tools from my shop, a rod and strap, this is for flogging transgressors, and a shofar, this is necessary in the event that someone must be excommunicated, and a sandal, which is necessary in the event of a chalitza ceremony to release, a brother and a widow of a man who died having no children, that they need to marry each other or perform the chalitza ceremony, and the chalitza ceremony includes a sandal. The Gemara interprets other verses related to the topic of adjudicating cases. Deuteronomy 1:16. And I charge your judges at that time, saying, hear the causes between your brethren, and judge righteously between a man and his brother, and the stranger who is with him. Understanding that the word charged, right, and I charged your judges at that time, what does this mean? It indicates alacrity. How do we know? Rabbi Yochanan says, Moses urged the judges with regard to the rod and the strap, be vigilant. With regard to the clause, hear the causes between your brethren and judge. Rabbi Hanina says this is a warning to the court that it may not hear the statement of one litigant before the other litigant comes. And it is a warning to a litigant that he may not explain his statements to the judge before the other litigant comes. right? Now, we're kind of accustomed to this, that, the court does not begin until all of the parties are in court, and then the judge enters, and then they begin, the case. What you don't have is that either the plaintiff or the defendant is missing, the other one is in court, the judge is in court, and the guy starts stating his case. You don't do that. Both litigants have to be in the presence of the judge before either one of them starts telling his story to the judge. Read into the phrase in the verse, here the cause is between your brethren, that it is also concerning the litigant. Although he is not the judge, he is also required to assure that the case is conducted in the presence of both parties. In other words, it's not only on the judge to say, whoa, I don't want to hear anything until both parties are in the room. It's also on the parties. If one of them starts talking to the judge before the other party is there, he also is transgressing. It's not only, that responsibility is not only on the judge, it's on the litigants as well. Rav Kahana says the litigant's responsibility may be derived from here. Exodus 23:1, from the words, you shall not bear, tisa, you shall not bear a false report. Although conjugated in this manner, the verb would seem to be addressed to the judges, right? You shall not hear a false report, but it's bear. So commanding them to not lend credence to a false report. You shall not suffer a false report, right? You shall not allow a false report. You shall not give credence to a false report. The term may also be read as, you shall not deliver, tasi. You shall not deliver a false report. Conjugated so that it addresses the litigants and the witnesses. Right? Obviously, it's a major sin to bear false witness, to give false testimony, and that's on everybody. The judge is not to listen to it, the litigants not to give it, and the witnesses not to give it. The Gemara returns to the verse in Deuteronomy cited above, and I charge your judges at that time, saying, hear the causes between your brethren and judge righteously. Reish Lakish says, verify the judgment by meticulously examining the particulars of the case and only afterward implement it. And the verse continued, between a man and his brother and the stranger who is with him. And Rabbi Yehuda says the judge must distinguish even between the merits of a house and the upper story when dividing a 2-floor property among inheriting brothers. Meaning, let's say 2 brothers inherit a house from their father. Okay, and it's like a duplex where there's basically, a home above and a home below. Right? You could easily say, okay, well, there's 2 brothers. I'm going to give one brother the upper story and the other brother the lower story. End of the matter. You don't do that because the upper story might not have the same value as the lower story. Maybe it's bigger, maybe it's smaller, maybe it's less convenient, maybe there's a leak, maybe it needs repairs. There's a lot of specifics that need to be looked into. And a judge, who wants to get to his golf game that afternoon, can't just say, okay, split it. You get the upstairs, you get the downstairs. See ya. No. He has to investigate the matter and make sure there's a righteous verdict. With regard to a clause in the verse, and the stranger who is with him, gero, the word gero resembles the word dwell, gur. And Rabbi Yehuda says the word teaches that the judge must distinguish even between the merits of an oven and a stove. The judge must carefully weigh how to divide even these domestic items in a case of inheritance to ensure that the distribution of property is absolutely equitable. I'm almost done. Questions or comments? Please get them in now. The verse states, you shall not respect, takiru, you shall not respect people in judgment. You shall hear the small and the great alike, and you shall not be afraid before any man, for the judgment is God's, and the cause that is too hard for you, you shall bring to me, and I will hear it. That's Moses talking. But this idea that, you're not going to favor the rich and powerful over the poor. You're also not going to favor the poor because they're poor and they're up against a rich person. A judge is charged to judge with truth and righteousness, according to the law. Nothing else. Doesn't matter who the parties are. And if they can't figure it out, then they go to a higher judge. Rabbi Yehuda says, do not recognize him, takirehu, i.e. do not acknowledge the litigant as a friend in your role as a judge. Rabbi Elazar says, even if he is your opponent, do not estrange him, tenakerahu, in such a way as to prejudge him as liable, but treat him as though you don't know him at all. Right? Somebody who's your friend, you might have a very good relationship with him. Maybe you're his friend, even though you know what his faults are. So now that you're brought in as a judge, the fact that you know him as a friend might actually not favor him at all. It might actually hurt him, because you know that this guy is a little bit shady. He's a good guy to hang out with, but, he takes liberties. And as now that you're called in to judge him, you might prejudge that he did that in this case. No, you don't favor him. You don't disfavor him. As a judge, it's only about the truth, only about hearing the witnesses, only about evaluating the law. There was an incident. Rav's host, not Ushpizin, but Ushpiza Kaneh. Big word. Ushpiza Kaneh. So Rav's host, a guy who would host Rav when Rav was always traveling and judging, and from time to time he would stay in this man's house. And this man who hosted Rav from time to time came before him for a judgment. Rav said to his friend, this host who hosts him in his house from time to time, "Are you not my host?" And the man said, "Yes, I am." And the host then said to him, "I have a dispute with another person that needs judgment." Rav said to him, "I am disqualified to judge for you because I may be partial to you due to what you have done for me." Rav said to Rav Kahana, "Please go out and judge the case since I'm recusing myself since this guy does me favors. I stay by his house from time to time." Rav Kahana saw that Rav's host was acting haughtily due to his relationship with Rav. He thought that he was going to win since he knows Rav. And therefore, now that Rav Kahana had been appointed in his place, he thought that he would still win because Rav recused himself, but appointed Rav Kahana. So he thought that the guy that Rav appointed would be favorable to him. That's what he thought. Rav Kahana said to this man, "If you are prepared to listen, then listen to me and follow my instructions. And if not, I will take Rav out of your ears." Meaning, I will treat you harshly and you will understand that your relationship with Rav will not help you at all. Rav Kahana spoke truth to this guy. Okay, that's where we'll stop. That's at the top of page 8a. Nina and I are on our way to an event, so I'm going to keep it quick on the questions. Sharon, does the line about a judge not being dependent on teruma mean indirectly that a Cohen or a Levi should not be eligible to be a judge? What a great question, Sharon. Now, they're saying figuratively, right? You can't be dependent on other people like a priest is dependent on terumos, which he receives as the tithing process people give to priests. So does that mean that a Cohen or a Levi actually cannot be a judge because they receive tithes from the nation? I don't know. I think maybe what you could say is, first of all, maybe you're right. And maybe he can judge, but if any of the people who come before him are people who regularly, because they can choose who to give their tithes to. So if the people who tithe to this particular Levi or Cohen, come before him for a judgment, he would have to do what Rav did and recuse himself for that reason. More than that, I don't know, but great question. Bill, the sages came from a culture that was strongly communitarian. We come from one that is strongly individualistic. If we're not careful, we might take their commentary here incorrectly and forget, as they would not, that independence is always relative, even a bit illusory. We might do this because this particular blind spot is endemic to our culture. Bill, I feel like there's a lot more to unpack there than what you just said. This is probably one of those themes that you study deeply and on a regular basis. I'd have to think a lot more about this, that their society was much more communitarian than ours. Ours is much more individualistic. But I think, it's funny. I would say America at large, for sure, 100%. I feel like the community that I live in, this from Orthodox community here in our neighborhood, we're all so intertwined with each other that it feels maybe a little bit more like this. Nevertheless, it's not that our rabbis are solely our judges. I mean, there are different beis-dins that you could go to. There's the whole secular law and secular system. So I think there's a lot of truth in what you're saying. And finally, Sharon, independence from what? I think the sages of the time were very specific in language and context. I don't think it is as arbitrary as you are implying. Are Sharon and Bill talking to each other? Probably. But yeah, listen. I mean, I think the one thing that we're seeing over and over and over again is the sages saying you have to be so careful to be impartial and to be fully committed to the law and righteousness. The fact that they need to keep reminding that each other, right? These people are so righteous, such a high level. They're like saints. And still, they have to remind themselves and each other constantly to not even have the whiff of impropriety. Kal v'chomer, how much more? How much more so do we have to remind ourselves to constantly check ourselves, remind ourselves, slow down. Am I doing the right thing for the right reason? Or am I just serving my own inclination? I mean, it's just something we have to pray for guidance and help and strength for every day. That's what I've got for us tonight. Happy Hanukkah, the first night of Hanukkah. Look forward to learning with you again tomorrow, God willing, at the regular Thursday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. All the best.